Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America. On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, we talk to prominent US citizens not just about their country's past and present, but also about its future. What, I ask my American guests, will be the 21st century fate of their now venerable republic? Hello everybody, welcome back to Keen on America. Today we talk with the American writer, politician, and doctor, Josh McConkey. And as always on Keen on America, I began by asking Josh where and when he was born.
I'm Dr. Josh McConkey. I was born in 1977 in Renton, Washington, outside of Seattle.
Were you born as doctor?
No. Joshua Michael.
Joshua Michael McConkey. Josh, do you feel you're an American?
Yes, I do.
What does that mean? How does it feel to be an American?
For me, it's an honor and a privilege. Just as someone who's carried men and women off the battlefields, overseas, served in our military for 22 years, and I'm a huge military history buff, so it means a tremendous amount to me.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in rural western Nebraska, a small town in the Panhandle, Alliance, Nebraska. And
I know one of the trivia questions about you is that Tim Walz was your teacher for a while.
Yes, the running for vice president of the United States. It was a sociology and world geography teacher in western Nebraska back in the early 90s.
Was it a classic Nebraskan upbringing means, Josh? Is that what you had?
Well, my dad was a railroader, and I was the first McConkey to go to college. So, pretty traditional blue-collar upbringing. Literally, my dad was a railroader, my grandfather was a railroader, and my grandfather. So I was the first McConkey to go to college, and just small rural town.
But what did that mean as an American? Nebraska is often thought of as the heart of America, the center of the country, culturally, politically, demographically. Did that occur to you when you were growing up? Were you in any way engaged with being an American? You're about as far away from the coasts as you could be, from Los Angeles, from San Francisco, from New York.
I was very fortunate. I got to travel a lot as a child. My parents, I was born outside of Seattle, Washington, and spent a lot of time out in the Pacific Northwest. I had cousins in New Hampshire, in California, but the majority of my time was spent up in a rural small town. I felt pretty fortunate that I got exposed to some other kind of cultures and regions aside from western Nebraska, which is a pretty homogeneous, rural, hardworking region of the country. It's all railroading, agriculture, and ranch land out there.
And when you went to the coast, when you traveled around, did it sometimes occur to you that this was another country, or did you feel as if going to New York or Los Angeles was the same as Nebraska?
Yeah. You can tell the difference immediately. And one of the things that I love about America is that there are 50 distinct regions. They're states. So as a constitutional republic, there are 50 states that each have their own identity. They have their own little microculture, and it's something that as I've traveled around, I've been to just about every state in the country, but you get to learn something different about the people in each state and what sets them apart. And that's what makes America kind of so different. When you ask someone where they're from in Europe or in Asia, they'll tell you their country. If you ask someone from the United States, they're going to tell you what state they're from. And there's identity associated with that, and that's what makes me special being a Nebraskan.
So being Nebraskan is different from being a New Yorker or being from Alabama or being from New Mexico?
Yes.
And what then was quintessentially Nebraskan for you?
For me, growing up in the 80s and 90s, So college football and the sports culture in Nebraska is huge. We had 3 national championships while I was growing up, 94, 95, and 97. And that's some of the things that will set people apart. When you meet someone on a subway, you meet someone on an airplane, and you ask them where they're from, you can almost get to, just like you'll see overseas with like football clubs and soccer clubs, you ask them about their college football team, and for me it's the Cornhuskers.
Josh, people often think of their childhoods in nostalgic terms, a period which were more halcyon than the one they're living in right now. Do you think back at the 90s, pre 9/11, pre all the political divisions in America? Were the 90s the last great moment in American history for you?
No, we had a pretty divided country in the 90s as well. Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House. The first election that I got to vote in was 1996, and I do remember it was a Republican House when Clinton was president. There was a lot of division. Growing up in rural Nebraska, everyone is quite Republican, but outside, obviously we had a Democrat president at the time, and I've been a politics nerd for quite some time, so it's something I followed quite a bit, and I don't know if it was as divided then as it is now, but certainly it was a fun time to grow up.
Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
I was in Alliance, Nebraska. I was in military uniform that day. I had just gotten dressed, so the greens, like the dress greens that you've got, for doing a family practice rotation with Dr. Bruce Forney. And it was early in the morning. I was on the drive. Small town, so literally 5 minutes, and I heard on the radio that a plane had flown into the World Trade Center. And I knew what that meant. I had toured the World Trade Center with my high school band a couple years prior to that, and I knew that there were more people in those towers than lived in my entire town. I was an Army flight surgeon. I'm an Air Force flight surgeon now, and for a plane to fly into a building, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I immediately turned around. I turned on the news because I was staying at my parents' house. And then I watched the second plane fly into the other tower, and I knew immediately that it had to have been something terrorist involved. And then when you saw the buildings collapse, that was pretty overwhelming. It's probably one of the moments that's seared into my mind. December 7th was for my grandparents.
Let me go back to that original question I asked you, Josh, about being an American. Did that day change how you thought about being an American?
When you feel your country attacked on that type of global stage, someone with very ill intentions that killed a bunch of innocent people for being nothing more than just American, I took that very personal. I had already been in the military. I joined in April of 2000 in the Army National Guard, and I was very proud to be wearing the uniform that day. I don't think, had I not been in the uniform or already been in the military, I would have joined immediately anyways. Just with me being a huge military history buff, my grandfather had served in the military and always looked up to men and women in uniform. That was a big day.
Did it change your life?
It changed my life completely. I joined the military. The recruiters told me I'd be doing some fun medical missions in Central America, going down to Belize, Honduras, and of course after 9/11 everything changed, and we've essentially been at war my entire career. I served in Iraq in 2007. I carried a lot of men and women off the battlefield. I carried body bags and American heroes. I came home and just really changed a lot about who I was. I was married previously and probably had some different goals in life. And before something like 9/11 happened, and then my combat service in 2007 just changed things for me tremendously. So it became about what I could contribute to this country, not about how big your car is, what kind of house you have, how much money you make. Nobody cares about any of that. Everything that I do in my life, it just changed my entire mindset that if I remove money from the equation completely, what I do, is is this making America a better place? Is this going to be a better place for my kids? And that's really how I make my decisions. So prior to 9/11 in that combat service, I suppose I was, just like everybody else, trying to make money and do things. It changed everything for me.
Do you think the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which of course were architected by elites in both parties, particularly the Republicans, do you think those elites let the American people down? We've had many shows with ex-servicemen who are deeply disappointed one way or the other with the wars, how they were conducted, maybe even the very nature of the wars themselves. Did it make you, as someone involved in these wars, as an American patriot and an idealist, did it make you more cynical about America's political and military elite?
I don't think it made me more cynical. It definitely gave me a very unique perspective. I've been very disappointed in our civilian leadership. The things that I saw in Iraq in 2007, the men and women that we carried off the battlefield, there were some massive strategic failures there. Most simplest of terms, if you don't have an exit strategy, if you don't have a long-term strategy, there really wasn't any point in being there. I told myself personally in 2007 that, there was being there for the men and women that you serve with. I mean, that's clearly why I was there, and that's what I focus on and take a lot of pride in. But having that, like Camp Anaconda, so LSA Anaconda in Balad, had the largest air base and the second most air traffic on the planet, second to London Heathrow. Having that strategic foothold in Iraq kept a check on Iran. And then in 2011, when Obama just pulled everything out, we created a monster vacuum. We created ISIS. We destabilized the entire region. You saw how the dominoes fell in Syria. And just, I'm sure it had some impact, geopolitically on what happened, all the way coming to, look at October in 2023 with the Hamas and Israel. But there was many strategic failures there that I do talk about a little bit in my book. I talk about that one for a while.
Your book is entitled Weight Behind the Spear, and it's a book, like so many these days, about the divisions in America. You noted that there were divisions in the 90s, but how has the politics of the last 24 years, really since the turn of the century, how has that deepened the divisions in America? Why, in your view, are Americans so divided?
Well, I think that we've kind of hit a point where, me personally, I feel that the federal government has overstepped a lot of bounds. This is a constitutional republic. I don't want, I don't want people in California telling me what to do in North Carolina or in Texas or in Nebraska, where I grew up. There's a large part of the country that just puts too much faith in their government, their federal government. I very much believe that the United States is a constitutional republic, and outside of the powers granted in the Constitution, to the federal government, it should be run by the states. They've just, I think COVID, you saw a monster difference. As a healthcare provider, you saw differences in blue states and red states. Blue states tended to shut down small business, mandating vaccines. I'm a physician. I believe in vaccines. They save a lot of lives. But for a federal government to come down with a mandate telling you that they're gonna remove your ability to put food on the table for your family without injecting unless you inject a foreign substance into your body, is so completely bizarre and Orwellian for me. It way crossed the line with federal government intervention on that. And 50% of the country believes in one thing, 50% of the country believes in something else, and you're going to see in this election in 2023, it's basically going to be a coin flip to see how this country is going to go.
But Josh, I asked you the question of why the country is divided. You gave me your view, which is, as you suggest, probably the view of about half Americans. Another half have faith in the federal government. I think you could find others who would strongly disagree with you, saying the government has done a lot of good. How do you bridge those divisions? Do we split the baby, so to speak, or is there a third way?
There's always another way. think social media is, when you ask what's changed in the last 24 years, the social media in this country, and that's where I think you'll see like the youth, when you look at the younger, so Be the Weight Behind the Spirit, the book, I talk about my concerns with social media. And I was raised without social media, so by the time I got into medical school and practice as a physician, these social media sites were running out. But people can get information instantly without, I think where people lack the ability to evaluate their sources is the biggest problem with social media. Anybody with an iPhone or a camera can just blurt out anything as fact, post it online, and there's just there's a large percentage of the younger population that doesn't know fact from fiction anymore and how to evaluate a resource. I think it's a huge problem, and so you'll see propaganda on both sides, left and the right, that just spreads information that's just not true, and a lot of people have difficulty determining which is which, and it really just fuels the fire. It's gaslighting on both sides. For me, I'm really hopeful that we can pull together as a nation and just focus on some of our, national security threats with China and Russia, and focus on our younger generation, because as we teach them the leadership skills, they're going to be able to see through some of this social media and actually make some better decisions for the country to bring us together. It's a huge task, but I'm going to try.
Josh, you've been on the front lines, quite literally in a sense, of America over the last quarter century as an ER doctor. I know you're quite critical of the medical system, and you see some of the consequences of the crises in America emerge from anxiety and drug addiction and suicide. I mean, these things, of course, always existed. Had we been speaking in the mid-90s, though, had you been an emergency doctor, an ER person in the middle of the 90s, do you think your vision of America would have been different? Are things much more dire, darker, more catastrophic on the front lines in these ER wards?
Yeah, they're not more dire or more darker. They just have a lot more focused coverage, and with social media, everything is just instantaneously available with basically no filter, and so that certainly contributes. But when you look at the opioid crisis, that didn't exist in the 90s. People had to get old school and use heroin. In the early 2000s, when you started to see the rise in the prescription drug epidemic, there's a whole section of the book with Purdue Pharma and their involvement in painting these as safe and non-addictive when that clearly wasn't the case. And then the federal government instituted pain is the fifth vital sign, so a very subjective score of which the guidelines that were written for JCO and initial Medicare, they were actually written by Purdue Pharma. So that is very disturbing, and you can see what's happened over the last 24 years is a lot of loss of life, and it's the emergency physician that has to walk into that room and look parents in the eye, that their son or daughter or parent or family member has died. I've sat down and I've cried with those families. I've done it hundreds of times, and it really went into why I wrote the book.
You're a Republican. We'll talk about your political career later in this conversation, and some people might be surprised. The Republicans, traditionally the party of the market, of private corporations like Purdue Pharma. Does their corruption and their responsibility in some ways for the deaths of certainly the suffering of so many people, the deaths of despair, which has now become common parlance amongst economists. Does that suggest, you said before that you thought there was too much federal government, but does that suggest that the federal government should be more involved in regulating companies like Purdue Pharma?
So first off, with that generalization, like the Republican Party, like my Republican Party, the party that I've been a part of my entire life, and really the focus, it's about just like families and faith and culture, just freedoms to be an American without, federal government intervention. The second part of the question?
The second part of the question is one about regulating private companies like Purdue Pharma. Should there be more government intervention when it comes to regulating companies that have clearly done so much terrible damage to American society?
Well, and that's the entire problem right there, is our federal government had an active part in fueling the opiate crisis specifically. So by them tying in hospital compensation, and then hospitals in turn using some of these satisfaction scores and things that they instituted to actually pay physicians, they created a culture and a climate where they were promoting the use of these drugs, knowing full well the abuse potential. I think it was hidden for the first couple of years when I was a resident. So I recognized this in 2003. So my intern year as a physician, as an emergency doctor, was 2003. And I got a nickname very quickly. They called me the Naprosyn Nazi. So many patients were expecting, it's funny, they called me the Naprosyn Nazi because I refused to prescribe opiates.
What's the Naprosyn bit? I get the Nazi bit.
Naprosyn. So naproxen sodium is the generic for Naprosyn, and that's a non-steroidal medication, similar class as Motrin or ibuprofen. So I was prescribing lots of Naprosyn and got that nickname Naprosyn Nazi. If you watch Seinfeld at all, there's the soup Nazi in there. You're like, no soup for you.
Yeah.
I was the Naprosyn Nazi. You're like, no narcotics for you.
So you saved some people's lives, probably, just in that.
I did.
And certainly a lot of suffering.
And you've seen the pendulum.
But are you saying, Josh, I'm not sure this will convince everyone. Are you suggesting that the government is responsible in some way for companies like Purdue Pharma and the opioid crisis?
I do think they have a large part to play. I referenced an article from a Missouri healthcare journal that really chronicled, really from start to finish, the government involvement and the concerns there, and the way they tied that into the whole federal government programs with Medicare and the JCO credentialing. That's the joint accreditation that accredits hospitals. And so basically, if you weren't using this pain as the fifth vital sign, they were threatening to pull accreditation. In doing so, they really added fuel to the fire there, and I think there was probably some top cover from some healthcare executives in the federal government. They had to have known that these drugs were addictive. I don't know how they could get away with having Purdue Pharma actually write the guidelines, but they did, and that's what happened. So I do think they have a large part to play with that.
Josh, you've traveled extensively. You've worked overseas, I think in Australia, New Zealand, other countries. Are there other models for a healthcare system that America can learn from? I know you're not particularly impressed with the dysfunctionality of the American medical system.
So that's the catch. So if you go to a completely socialized model, having practiced in Australia and New Zealand, lots of friends that have worked in the NHS in the UK as well, American healthcare certainly has its issues. But when you start to ration care, the only way you control the costs with a completely socialized healthcare system is to restrict that access to care. And just personally, things that I saw, gallbladder patients, acute abdominal pain, I would see patients in Australia. Just my last stint working in Australia was at Flinders University in Adelaide. And I saw a 40-year-old female with just some right upper quadrant pain, clearly some gallbladder issues. She had been waiting for 3 years for her gallbladder surgery. She didn't get septic, she didn't have a fever or a white count, just a tremendous amount of pain. And so they kept kicking that can down the road. That patient in the United States would have had that gallbladder taken out immediately. Or the patients that had a private healthcare card in Australia, the exact same situation, would hand that card to the surgeon. They would roll them down the hallway across the street to the private hospital and have it taken out. So there's certainly pluses and minuses with socialized healthcare versus the system we have here, but it's it really is a mess either way. I think
What grade would you give the American medical system? Would it get a C?
Oh, well, it depends. Do you have insurance or do you not have insurance?
If you have insurance.
So, if you've got insurance, it's going to be an A. If you could pick anywhere else in the world, if you come with a rare leukemia or Hodgkin's lymphoma or a rarer cancer, I think like the research dollars and the money is very good in the United States. If you have the same issues in a socialized healthcare system, the socialized healthcare system runs fairly well with primary care issues, most emergency care for the most part, and just kind of your bread and butter healthcare conditions. But as soon as you have something serious or something that's more rare, that the wait times and the outcomes would never fly in the United States because you'd be sued. So our legal system needs to be completely revamped with our healthcare system. Our medical legal system is atrocious.
We've done a number of shows, I was telling you before we went live, Josh, with doctors suggesting that most doctors in America, even if they're reasonably well paid, are pretty miserable. Do you think that's true?
Oh, they're absolutely more miserable. The burnout rate for physicians in the U.S. is markedly higher than in other countries. Personally, as an emergency physician, when I started into emergency medicine, I had some of my professors at the University of Nebraska. They sat me down and they just talked about healthcare in the U.S. and specifically with emergency medicine, that the lifespan of an emergency physician, like an active practice as an emergency doctor, is about 15 years. And at that 15-year mark, I completely agreed with them. I've been practicing medicine for 22 years. If you stay focused on just patient care and saving lives and trying to do good things for people, it makes it worthwhile. But so much of the American healthcare system is just kind of administrative bureaucracy. These patient satisfaction scores, which I said there's a whole chapter in the book on those things there, just make it so frustrating. Fighting with insurance companies, those types of things really. And then COVID was a complete disaster. So that I know a lot of healthcare professionals that just flat out retired after COVID.
Old friend of the show, Robbie Pearl, who used to run Kaiser Permanente, large insurance firm large insurance network provider in California, believes that AI can solve a lot of the problems with American medicine. Do you think there's some truth to that?
I haven't seen any demonstrable benefit in the clinical setting, because I work more clinically. I was at Duke University for a while, long before AI. I would love to see some studies on that and how they could do a randomized controlled study on that. As a physician, I practice evidence-based practice, so I would give it a fair shot. I haven't seen that in actual practice yet. Just with the decisions that I make, they're life and death decisions, and I have not seen it. I would not trust AI with that yet.
Josh, you've gone from medicine to politics. What attracted you to politics? Part of the narrative in Be the Weight Behind the Spear is a description of your involvement in politics.
I think the exact opposite. It is not an attraction to politics. It is a complete aversion to politics. I'm disgusted by it. So the way you see them play these games, nothing gets done, nothing is efficient. So between me as a military commander, taking care of 100 men and women that are trying to serve this country and put us in a position to thwart Chinese aggression, I have had my budget completely slashed. In FY 2023, I received 13% of my budget. It absolutely crippled us. It crippled our readiness. And then as an emergency...
So let me just jump in. I didn't mean to interrupt. You said America isn't at war with China, is it? How does your involvement in the military connect with China?
So there's, certainly, we have been in a conflict with China for several decades now. When you look at the way they're stealing, military secrets, hacking into systems, American businesses, just completely hijacking, their information and technology. We don't have a kinetic conflict at all, but certainly like the cyberspace realm. There are some real threats. I certainly can't talk about anything classified.
No, I understand. And we were going to do this conversation actually at Andrews Air Force Base, but I forgot my green card. So actually, for our viewers and listeners, tell us a little bit about your involvement now with the U.S. military? I know you have an office at Andrews Air Force Base. What exactly are you doing with them?
So I'm a commander in the Air Force Reserves. I command an aeromedical staging squadron. So as a physician, as a flight surgeon taking care of pilots and crews, and as a CCAT physician, so a critical care air transport doctor, flying patients. We can be anywhere on planet Earth in 24 hours with backpacks of equipment better stocked than most third world hospitals. And I run an aeromedical staging squadron. So we have CCAT teams, these critical care teams that take care of injured men and women from Department of Defense, other U.S. military and State Department individuals. We run an en-route patient staging system. So we basically set up the facility that injured men and women will come to before they get on an aircraft. So if you get on an aircraft or you get off an aircraft, you're being seen at an en route patient staging facility before you're sent to other locations within the U.S. or around the world, all through the U.S. Transcom, U.S. Transportation Command air evacuation system. I've got 100 men and women under my command, and we take a tremendous amount of pride taking care of the men and women that get injured and take lead for this country. So I've been doing that for 2 years, and 22 years of service now.
Did your involvement in American politics, you didn't win your race, but for someone who was unknown and not well funded, you did reasonably well. Did that make you more or less concerned about the current state of America? A lot of people believe that democracy is in existential crisis. Others think that that's exaggerated. Given your involvement in politics, what's your sense of the current health of the American political system, particularly the two-party system and the way in which aspiring politicians like yourself get involved?
The amount of money that's put into these races is obscene. So I was outspent by $12 million by a candidate. I certainly felt that I had great qualifications. I was probably the best qualified in that race. And not having $12 million, it was, I learned that the hard way. So that's certainly what happens in the U.S. For good or for bad. It's all about that type of money. And I think you're probably missing out on real leaders, because the type of person who will just throw $12 million of daddy's money into a race might not be the best one, for policy making and leading this country forward. But that's kind of what you get on both sides, both Republican and Democrat. It's just, these races are just fueled by obscene amounts of money and special interests. And until the American public really wakes up and puts more stock into substance and service, we're going to continue to have some issues. But I'm going to continue to try. I don't give up easy.
Again, Josh, you sound a little bit like a Democrat more than a Republican. Most of the Democrats who come on this show spend a long time complaining about there being too much money in politics. Republicans are less concerned. What about the populist strain, particularly in the Republican Party? How would you position yourself?
I believe in the U.S. Constitution. I've talked before about this being a constitutional republic, and this is what I'll tell people. Listen, there are 50 individual states with 50 individual unique identities and a culture. So, if you want to be like super liberal and you want to these are my personal feelings, all right? But if you want to give people free drugs and decriminalize drugs, and you see what's happened in Portland and in San Francisco, there's a place for you. If everyone just wants to get around the kitchen table and sing Kumbaya, there's a place for you. And people have their judgments on California politics. I am more on the side of actual individual liberty. I don't want the federal government in my business. When you talk about Texas and North Carolina and Nebraska, all states that I've lived in, I identify with those types of politics. For me, the Republican Party is an inclusive party. All comers. I have posted on my door when you walk into my squadron, and certainly nothing political, but I value people based on their character and their professionalism. I don't care where you're from. I don't care who you know. I don't care what your sexual preference is or the color of your skin. America is a wonderful place. That's why I love the military as well. Is because you're judged on your integrity and your professionalism and your character, and that's kind of how I carry myself, and that's the Republican Party to me.
I have to say, as somebody who lives in San Francisco, you and I are talking at the moment in Washington, D.C., perhaps your view is a little exaggerated. There are no homeless people or drug addicts or criminality on my street, certainly.
So I can tell you some stories personally from Portland. So when I served in the 304th Rescue Squadron, that's a combat search and rescue squadron in Portland, Oregon. Portland is beautiful. Great breweries, great scenery. I would catch some soccer matches there, Portland Timbers. And over the 2 years that I spent in Portland, they took such a hard left turn. They decriminalized drug use. They were handing out needles and literally drugs on the streets. The homeless problem and the drug crisis in Portland, Oregon is very well publicized. It is absolutely horrific. I was so uncomfortable the last Portland Timbers game that I went to. I got on the train that goes into downtown from out by the airport. Me being a combat veteran, having served with some special forces guys, I was so uncomfortable, and it was clearly in danger. That was the last time I took the train into Portland. And what's funny about that is these super left policies. So what they did by decriminalizing that, and they basically said, these people are all victims, and so what we're going to do, we're going to give them all counseling. All right, so we're just going to decriminalize everything, make sure everybody's got clean needles, and like my personal motto is don't feed the bears. Don't feed the bears. So in the emergency department, I don't give narcotics. Guess who doesn't show up a lot of my shifts? Drug seekers. So when you do that in Portland, what they did, they just refused to enforce any laws. Things got so out of hand, and I chuckled a little bit because it was so common sense. But surprisingly enough, homeless people strung out on drugs don't show up for their counseling appointments. I can't imagine why. They don't. It's absolutely, it's insane, but it's true. So they literally were just giving all these people counseling appointments, but none of them showed up. So in the last 6 months, they've completely reversed course. It's been a total disaster. If you just walk the streets of Portland, the crime, the violent crime, the drug abuse, and then they would rent out hotels. They would literally buy hotels and provide them as housing. They would just get completely destroyed and had to be gutted. So I've seen that personally. So that's you've seen in other areas of the country. I saw some of that in Austin, Texas as well. It's a recurring theme in some of these cities that lean a little bit more on the liberal side.
Josh, in the upcoming election, those issues, I think, will be important, but probably less important than the issue of abortion. As an ER doctor, as a Republican, where do you stand on that? You talked about freedom before. A lot of people, particularly on the left in the Democratic Party, believe it is the basic right of a woman to choose to control her own body. What's your take on this?
So that's the fundamental question on whether you believe that human being inside that woman is alive or not. So, when you say everyone has a choice over their bodies, and, I make that argument, listen, you can't force people to ingest something into their body, right? And so, people that are really staunch supporters of abortion were like, well, why are you telling this woman what to do with their body? Just my stance on that, like as a physician, I have seen people die so many different ways. I have carried people off of battlefields. Life is an amazing and a very precious thing. And just me personally, I've seen enough killing. I've seen enough people die that I value life. It's very, 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 very precious. And so I support life. And so that's the fundamental question is, do you believe that embryo, that developing baby, do you believe that's alive or not? I feel that it is. And so when a woman wants to make those choices, when you're talking about abortion, it's not just her body. There's another living thing inside of her. That's the fundamental question. I believe it's alive. There are those that don't, and that's where you see people butt heads on that issue.
So for you then, abortion is a kind of murder?
I believe it is, and certainly in the state of North Carolina, we've at least defined that as 12 weeks, and so there's where do you draw that line? Certainly there's people that feel like the moment that it's conceived, and doing anything after that is murder, and then you've got the other side of it that wants to do partial birth abortions, and people that a baby can survive. Like with some of the medical advances that we've had, like 24 weeks, 26 weeks, I have a very difficult time justifying outside of immediate threat of life to the mother. And then certainly with the rape and incest, there's other nuances there that as an emergency physician, I carried a rape pager for an entire month. So in residency, it was a rotation. I heard stories that will curdle your blood, just horrific stories that I don't know how you can ask someone to carry something like that to term. But you can't carry it to 38 weeks and then make that kind of decision. I believe that's murder.
Josh, at least the way Trump's presenting it in the election, he believes that it should reflect whatever states determine, so that America will be a place where some states you can get abortion, some states you can't. Each state will have different laws. Does that work for you?
That's how it was actually supposed to happen. So when you saw the decision, like Roe versus Wade in the 70s, it was an egregious decision. There is nothing in the United States Constitution that gives anyone the right to have an abortion or not. That's not something the Constitution was written for. We have a constitutional republic. There are 50 states. And if you want to be super liberal, there's states for you. If you want to live reasonably moderate, there's states for you. If you want to be more conservative, there are states for you. Thank God I live in North Carolina. But this, was correct. That was a correct decision. So that's a state's issue. That's not. I don't want the federal government involved in that. That is reserved for the states. So that's 100% correct.
And it doesn't chill you in any way that if that actually comes into effect, young women in particular will be traveling to California or New York or Massachusetts to get abortions. Isn't that going to be, in practical terms, rather?
Well, so this is America. You have a choice. Every state, you have a voice. Get out there and vote. Let your voice be heard. We did that in North Carolina. We have a 12-week, ban on abortion. I think it's very reasonable. You have a choice.
Should that be the same, though, Josh, in all medical areas? For example, if some of the more progressive states, for example, passed laws that allowed people to commit suicide.
Well, they'd have. Oregon has a.
Okay, well, go back to your favorite city, your favorite state, Oregon.
Yeah.
What becomes of America then? I take your point about its federal structure, but those issues, weren't they resolved in a sense by the founders in the Federalist versus the Anti-Federalist debates, that if America was going to become a viable republic, it needed a functional central government, and states weren't countries?
Yeah, regulate interstate commerce, defend the borders, central currency. All those were big debates, back when this country was founded. Outside of that, I think the federal government has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and you look at all these regulations. So if you're a strict constitutionalist and you look at the laws that every American in this country are held to, those laws need to be debated and out in the public. Right now, you've got several big like FCC and just these regulatory authority that have completely bypassed our Constitution. That's my personal feel. That every day the Congressional Federal Register of just new laws and rules that are just thrown out by these agencies. It's this thick by day, this thick each week, and then every month there's just this big a stack. I went to law school for a little while. I didn't finish the degree. I'm a physician. I moved on in my life. But those types of things, they're not beholden to our legislative review process, and I don't agree with that. So just the federal government has got way out of hand. The money, the expense. At some point we paid hyper in our the budget. $38 trillion now, and just climbing. That has to be addressed at some point. I have 3 kids. We can't just dump that on them.
Josh, where is America then in 2024? We've got this upcoming election. We have what some people see as a crisis of anxiety. You've already talked about the opioid crisis. We haven't even touched on inequality. How healthy, as a doctor, how healthy or unhealthy is America in 2024?
I think it's healthy to have those debates. and I think it's healthy to do them without violence. I think we should be able to sit down and talk with friends and neighbors and family. I mean, I've got some very close family members. They're pretty raging liberal, and we have some great spirited conversations. But at the end of the day, I love my sister to death. I just completely disagree with her politics, and that's okay. And we sit down and we settle it at the battle box. And that's what makes America special. This is not a third world nation. This is not a place where we're going to be, it talks of overthrowing governments and things like that. No, it cannot happen. We cannot have violence.
So you have faith in the electoral system. I know there were some people, the January 6th people, who don't have confidence in the American system. They think it's being corrupted and that the elections aren't free. Do you still have faith in the American political system?
There were clearly concerns that were valid in some cases. I know in North Carolina we addressed that with some very simple things with the voter registration, voter ID laws, just make them fair. So I have faith. I live in North Carolina. I have complete faith in our election system there. We passed some legislation to protect that.
America, Josh, will probably survive 2024. It survived every other presidential election. In 2026, the Republic will be celebrating, if that's the right word, its 250th anniversary. What do you think you'll be doing on July the 4th, 2026?
Well, I tell you what I'm definitely going to be, and I'm going to be probably watching a football match. So 2026, the United States hosts the World Cup. I'm a huge soccer fan. I will be somewhere supporting the United States. And when you start getting into beginning to late or mid-July, for a World Cup, hopefully America's in a quarterfinals or a semifinals. So I will be somewhere having a lot of fun with some good friends.
What are you going to do if America is defeated in the World Cup by China or Iran?
We played Iran in
the last World Cup.
No, we played them early on as well. But hey, hats off to them. This is America. We love sport. We love competition. If they're better than us on that day, you shake your hand and hopefully gives us some motivation. I have faith that U.S. Soccer Federation has made some moves to make us more competitive. I know we just changed our coach.
But in all seriousness, Josh, in 2026, you'll be watching some World Cup. But will you be proud of the 250-year history? We began this conversation about you as an American. I'm guessing you'll probably go to some celebrations, some barbecues, some flag-waving events. Will you be proud? Will your heart be beating as an American?
Immensely proud. And that's something that I get to share with my family and my 3 children. I get to instill those American core values and celebrate those freedoms. And then, for me, just share some of those stories of some of the people that I served with. Those things are pretty special, and very, very proud. 250 years, that's pretty exciting.
And finally, Josh, I know you've got to run to get a plane now. After 2026, American history won't come to an end. It's still a relatively young, youthful republic, many more centuries, hopefully, for its existence. For the next 50 years, what do you think are the great priorities? I'm guessing you're going to suggest shrinking national government. What are the other projects that you would like to see achieved in an America between 2026 and 2076?
Well, it's when you're looking that far into the future, it's all about national security. Finding a way. We can't always get along. There's some different cultures. Having served in the Middle East, it's a totally unique culture. Sometimes you just have to agree to disagree and find some diplomatic things that you have in common to kind of move on. But America's always going to be about freedom and making sure that people around around the world are respecting some of those personal freedoms and fighting for those that they can't do that for themselves. Our national security is going to be probably number one for me. Hopefully I'm long retired by then in the military. But education, educational reforms, are going to be really, really important. My children, are going to be graduating high school here in the next 4 years.
I take your point on national security and on education, and I'm guessing you probably would have added reforming the medical system. But can this be done without government? You've railed earlier about the size and expense of government, but presumably it requires massive investment to arm America, massive investment to reinvent its education system. Is there any alternative in terms of financing or organizing these revolutions, in your view, to government?
But absolutely, you have to control costs. So, those expenses are something that we've got discretionary and non-discretionary, portions of the U.S. budget, and making changes there. I mean, boy, that would be a huge topic to jump into. But the finance, it has to be addressed. You just can't keep writing checks. You can't cash as a nation. That's eventually going to catch up to us. What other part of that question?
Well, Dr. Josh McConkey, the author of Be the Weight Behind the Spear, congratulations on the new book, and thank you so much for appearing on Keen on America.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.